Henry Anderson and I never had a formal wedding. At first, he claimed that we didn't have the money and that, as long as we were together, a wedding didn't matter. Later, as the years went by, he claimed that we had been husband and wife for so long that there was no reason to have one more. However, on our 50th wedding anniversary, he threw a lavish wedding that I watched from a distance as my husband, in his finest suit, held another woman tightly in his arms. At the same time, the entire town cheered, including my son Jose, who was celebrating the union as if it were the happiest day of his life. I stood there, frozen in place, thinking back on our 50 years of marriage and what I had gone through. From the days when we lived in a small 300-square-foot rental to the expansive house with a garden that we created together, from raising Jose with unwavering devotion to now caring for our grandson in the same way that I had once done for my 70-year-old son 50 exhausting years ago, I've had enough. Henry returned home wearing the same suit from before, with the exception that the collar now had a faint lipstick stain on it. My family trailed closely behind him, and I sat on the couch by myself like a stranger in my own house, with no lights on and no dinner ready, when Jose flipped the switch and the light suddenly came on. His voice erupted in surprise. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I laughed icily, thinking it was absurd that after more than 40 years of living in this house, my son was asking why I was here, and I didn't respond to his tone. Henry had just finished changing his shoes when he walked into the living room. He pretended to be ignorant and spoke in a casual manner. "What's wrong? You're acting strange today. I just want to know where you all were." Softened, putting on an act of false concern. "Why aren't you in bed? Sitting here in the dark like this is kind of creepy." They all looked at me as though they couldn't believe it. "Mom, what's gotten into you? Why are you being so dramatic?" "We didn't go anywhere special, we just had some errands to run," Jose said, lying easily, and I looked away. "You all were what?" I couldn't contain the rage that was building inside me any longer. My voice was Rose's, sharp and demanding for the first time. I sped up my phone and played the video on the screen as Henry stood in front of the entire town in his suit, kissing another woman at the altar as the crowd cheered. "Rebecca, you were spying on me." He didn't bother to speak, silently agreeing with the lie, saying, "How pathetic if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." How long were they going to continue this farce? "I can't believe you followed me, Rebecca. I never thought you were this kind of person. We're old now, so why are you acting so childish, sneaking around, and making unfounded accusations that Paula has breast cancer when she doesn't?" His initial reaction was not guilt or regret, but rather anger at being caught. His face was twisted in fury as he lunged forward, snatching my phone out of my hands and erasing the video. She had a lot of time left, and her final wish was to marry me. How could I refuse a dying friend such a basic request? "We didn't tell you because we didn't want you to worry too much or become upset over something so trivial, but now you're making a big deal out of it." I looked at him and thought it was completely ridiculous. He talked as though he were planning a lavish wedding for another woman, which I had never heard before. A profound sense of exhaustion settled in my bones as Jose chimed, his voice dripping with impatience. "Oh come on, Mom. At your age, you should be above all of this. Why are you acting so petty? Paula is dying." In 50 years of marriage, it was as trivial as taking a neighbor's dog for a walk, and even after being caught, he wasn't even attempting to make amends. I hadn't even said anything yet, but Jose had already chosen his side. His wife, Sophia, tugged at his arm, obviously uncomfortable with what he was saying. "Jose, that's enough." Meanwhile, my 1-year-old grandson Jacob exploded into the room, startled by the tension. Jose gave birth to his son late in life and lavished him with affection until he finally stopped talking, but before he stormed off with his family, he glared at me as though I was the one who had ruined everything. Then, I was left alone with Henry. "Look at what you did," he said, straightening his sleeves before settling down on the couch. "You just had to bring this up in front of everyone now, and the whole house is upset." I finished playing along calmly, so I reached into my bag and took out the divorce papers I had prepared beforehand. Henry put them on the coffee table and said, "Let's get a divorce, Henry." His expression was almost comical, as though he had thought that I would just accept his excuses and forgive the man who had stood at the altar with another woman. "Rebecca, enough for the tantrum," he threw. "We're in our 70s, we're not young anymore. Can't you just let it go?" he said. We weren't young anymore. I never thought that at this point in my life, I would have to confront the harsh truth that the man I had spent 50 years with was nothing more than a coward and a liar, but if anything, age was the reason I couldn't afford to waste any more time on him. I said in a steady voice, "We're not young anymore, so I need to leave. I won't let my life be spent feeling abandoned, unloved, and unwelcome." Henry looked at me with a complex mix of emotions in his eyes as he looked at the divorce papers, wondering if we were going to end things like this. I didn't answer, I just turned away, ready to go to the guest room, when he suddenly called out, "Fine, I'll sign. I've packed my belongings, whatever's left you can keep, and I'll be gone by morning. Shouldn't have kept it from you. If you ever need anything, you can still get in touch. Let's part ways amicably or as friends." I simply shook my head without turning around because I had nothing more to say. The following morning, I wheeled my suitcase to the door. Jose was already up and saw me. He saw the suitcase, but instead of offering to help his 70-year-old mother carry her belongings, he only worried about his mother. Dad was just doing something nice for Paula, they didn't do anything else. "Why are you being so unreasonable?" Jose kept making accusations, and I finally saw him for what he was, a thankless person. "You and Dad have been together for an eternity. How can you just divorce him like that? Who will cook, clean, and look after Jacob?" Egotistical man, a son I had raised for more than 30 years, and now realized that I had spent my life raising nothing but an intruder. I almost died giving birth to him due to an amniotic fluid embolism. It was a miracle that Jose and I survived that day. When he was young, he was everything a mother could hope for, obedient, kind, and loving. It was this same young boy who once vowed to protect me when he grew up, but now that same child was the one who rejected me and caused me the most pain. I couldn't stand to look at him any longer. Every moment I spent with him, every word he said, only made me feel worse. I struggled to move my suitcase toward the door, changed my shoes quickly, and went outside. After 70 years of life, I had finally realized how fleeting everything is. I only had one suitcase when I left that house, the rest didn't matter. Jose, upset that I wasn't answering, grabbed an empty glass from the counter and threw it in the trash can. The sound of the glass breaking was so sharp that it shattered our bond as mother and son forever. I turned to give him one last glance from the doorway, but whatever was left behind, I hope that after I leave, you'll take a moment to think back on everything I've done for this family. With that, I was done, and I didn't care if he had more to say. "Jose Torres, I am not your maid, I am your mother. What makes you think that it's my responsibility to cook, clean, and serve you? Perhaps I spoiled you too much over the years, which is why you've turned into this." The moment I left Henry Torres' house and returned to an apartment that was still in my name, I stopped living for them. I sat alone in that quiet place, looking back over the past few decades and realizing that nothing had ever truly belonged to me. I didn't care if he wanted to argue, so I turned and left. Even after I stepped outside, I could still hear things being slammed around inside, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Henry was young, attractive, and considerate back then. He was a year older than I through a mutual friend, and he had just graduated from college. I was a girl who had begun working immediately after high school and had been struggling to make ends meet for almost 5 years. He was concerned that we wouldn't have much in common because of our different educational backgrounds, so I spent night after night researching subjects that interested him so he wouldn't think I was lacking. The reason I didn't hold it against him is that I pitted him for the effort he had put into that relationship, only to be abandoned, so I made a promise to myself that I would make up for what he lost and take care of him in ways his ex never did when he was with her. I knew that he had once been in a long-term relationship for 3 years, but she broke it off because it became too much. When work got tough and he came home intoxicated from company dinners, I wiped him down, changed his clothes, and stayed by his side through the night. I believed he had married me because my devotion and love had finally reached him after we spent 50 years together. Buried in his thesis, I stayed up with him in the library, helping him gather research when he struggled to find a job after graduation. I also ironed his shirts, polished his shoes, and accompanied him to every interview. I was never his choice. I was just the woman he settled for after losing the one he truly wanted, and the moment she reappeared, he left without hesitation or second thought. However, none of that mattered anymore because I still had time, and for the rest of my years, I would no longer waste it. It was not a passionate romance, but we never fought much, and we also never had a love story worth remembering looking back on. Jose, on the other hand, wouldn't stop bugging me. He sent me message after message, repeating the same nonsense, telling me that I was too old to think, that I was embarrassing the family by insisting on this divorce, and that I would get. My friends were shocked when word of my divorce spread, but they didn't question my decision, they didn't judge me, and they didn't ask Tread to talk me out of it. Instead, they just stayed by my side as always. After a month of peaceful solitude, I decided to travel. I regretted it one day, but his words no longer affected me, so I blocked his number completely. Without Henry and Jose in my life, my days became blissfully simple for the first time in decades. I only had to think about what I wanted to eat and do, not what other people wanted or think about what other people wanted. One day, as I sat in my apartment watching a travel agency on TV, I had an unexpected thought. I suddenly remembered who I was before Henry, before marriage, before motherhood, and I had dreams. I worked hard not only to survive but also because I wanted to see the world and travel wherever I wanted to go. However, life happened, and I put Henry first, my family first, and my dreams first. Even the trips I did take over the years were never really mine. I went where Henry and Jose wanted to go, and even then, I was never free to just enjoy myself because I was always the one making sure they were happy and making sure everything went smoothly. This time, however, I was going for myself before I could overthink it. My dream of traveling was buried, forgotten, and left to gather dust in some dark corner of my mind. I picked up my phone and made a reservation for a group tour, and it ended up being the best choice I had ever made. I traveled alone for the first time in my life, tried foods I had never tried before, and saw amazing sights I never would have imagined seeing. I also met women who were just like me, women who had dedicated their lives to serving others only to find themselves alone in their later years, but they weren't angry. We made plans to stay in touch by the end of the trip, and some of them even discussed moving into the same retirement community so we could spend our golden years together. I took pictures of the places I visited and the moments I wanted to remember, and I posted them on Instagram so my friends could see what I was up to. Their comments were flooded with relief and excitement. Henry continued to follow my account and liked every single post, occasionally even leaving comments expressing how happy he was to see me having fun. However, to me, it was all just a pitiful attempt to ease his guilt, and I ignored all of his worries. They were worried that I wouldn't be able to move on from the divorce, but seeing me like this, traveling, smiling, and thriving, finally put their worries to rest. Interactions, refusing to allow his presence to taint my happiness. I didn't care what he thought anymore, whether he was sincere or not, whether he regretted his choices or not. It didn't matter to me as long as I was happy, and I was truly happy after a month of travel. When my plane landed, exhaustion hit me, but I knew there was still a lot to do, like unpacking, cleaning, and settling back. Before taking on all of that, I decided to go out for a while. I used to frequent a small cafe downstairs, and a warm latte and a simple pastry seemed like the ideal way to ease back into normal life. However, as soon as I opened the cafe door, I saw an unexpected visitor, a woman I had never really seen in person before, who gave me a knowing smirk before saying, "You must be Rebecca. You look better in person." Not Paula was sitting across from me in a well-tailored dress, and she was trying to make an impression with her hair and makeup. She smiled at me as if we were old friends, her face shining with a hint of smugness. "I liked Henry's comment that you were so old." Her praise felt almost sarcastic, especially given the contrast between her polished appearance and mine after a long day. "I'm Paula, a longtime friend of Henry's. He's mentioned you a lot, but we've never had the chance to meet in person. I heard you just now." I'm too exhausted to even freshen up. I probably looked like a wrinkled old woman next to her. From the outside, she didn't look sick at all. I didn't respond to her compliment, so she laughed awkwardly and then spoke in a soft, soothing tone. When I got back from a long trip, I sat down across from her and just nodded, not interested in carrying on the conversation. However, Paula, as if ignoring my tone of indifference, kept talking as if I hadn't said anything at all. "You must be exhausted and sentimental after being away from home for so long, and at our age, we become more sentimental. Henry and I, for example, had a long life full of both gains and losses." She paused, her smile deepening, her eyes glinting with an almost proud, wistful air, and said, "We've always had feelings for each other, but we let go because the long distance was just too hard. Now that we're both old and gray, we don't want any regrets left between us after all these years, so I couldn't help but laugh aloud to make up for it." I told Rebecca, my voice laced with sarcasm, "Your past love regrets, I'm supposed to voluntarily give up almost 50 years of my life letting you two be together, right?" She started as though she hadn't heard me at all, but who can control feelings? "A few months ago, I received a false diagnosis of breast cancer, and when I heard it, I felt like my world was falling apart. I was in such a panic that I reached out to I thought Henry wouldn't even want to see me, but to my surprise, he did." Paula smiled softly, as if she was hoping that I would respond to their love story, but I wasn't interested or cared. She continued, talking without acknowledging my silence, "And you have no idea how terrified he was when he learned that I had cancer. He held me and sobbed. I was moved for a long time, and after all these years, I didn't think Henry would still feel the same way about me." She leaned forward, her voice getting more animated as she went on, "And that's why he was so excited when I asked him to throw us a big, grand wedding. He told me I would be the happiest bride in the world, and he was always running around and taking care of all the wedding preparations for us." I raised an eyebrow in understanding. "You don't need to tell me about your love life, honestly, I don't care, and whatever happens." That's why Henry had been working late every day for the past few months. It was all for her wedding, and everything had been right in front of me, but I was too numb from years of monotony to see it. I was getting impatient and couldn't stand this woman's boasting about how much my ex-husband loved her, so I cut her off before she could say anything more. I got up, called the waiter to pay, and picked up my packaged croissant to go home. Are you in such a rush to leave? I still have a lot to say, Paula said, with a hint of hurt in her voice, but if you don't want to listen, then fine. I've said too much and upset you, and her phony act was making me sick because she was asking for it, and I had no reason to spare her feelings any longer. I paused, turned around, and with the thing is that you stole my husband and shamelessly got married to him, you're openly the third party in our marriage. You don't need to sugarcoat your twisted love story with all this talk of passion if you truly loved him. I said this in a firm voice, speaking directly to Paula's overly dramatic face. Really, can you at least have some dignity at your age? Finally, get together. What were you two doing all that time? My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and firm. And the whole cafe suddenly became aware of it. Paula clamped her mouth shut, her eyes started to swell, and she started to play the victim for sympathy. Rebecca, what are you even saying? Henry then hurried in, looking agitated and disheveled, and he quickly approached Paula, pulling her into a tight embrace. His concern was so inflated that it made my stomach turn. I know you're hurting, but this isn't Paula's fault, he said in a defensive voice. If you're upset, take it out on me, don't blame her. I was about to laugh in shock at their foolishness, but someone from across the cafe interrupted me. I believe I recently saw these two online. Didn't they just have a big public wedding? The whole cafe was silent for a while before the whispers started, and then the whispers quickly turned into full-fledged conversations. Everyone's eyes turned to me, their faces changing as they took in what they had just heard. To them, I was no longer Henry's legitimate wife, nor the woman who had married him for 50 years and raised a family. Instead, I was just a shameless elderly woman attempting to ruin a love story that had been decades in the making. As the talk around me became louder, accusations started to surface about how shameful it is that she is still trying to steal another woman's husband. At her age, Paula and Henry are the real couple, and they have been in love for so long that this woman simply cannot let go. She is acting aggressively and trying to start a fight. Henry, who had been standing frozen in the chaos, seemed to hesitate, possibly even considering clearing things up, but his gaze flickered to me with something that almost looked like guilt. Paula wasn't about to let that happen. She had the upper hand now and was going to make sure I bore the consequences. I was wondering why he left her, and the words were cutting. The weight of every insult directed at me fell on Q, who clutched her chest and leaned feebly into Henry's arms, her face twisted in agony. I don't feel well, she said. What if the doctors were right and the cancer diagnosis wasn't a mistake after all? Paula then collapsed into Henry's embrace, pretending to be unconscious, and Henry instantly panicked, regardless of any guilt he may have felt or any intention he may have had to defend me. Paula dissolved in a moment, and he didn't even turn to face me. He didn't care that I had just been humiliated or that I was being falsely accused in front of a whole cafe. His only concern was holding Paula in his arms, and he hurried to the exit, yelling for someone to call an ambulance. The onlookers who had been chatting about it pulled out their phones and offered to call for help, but I was nothing. No one was interested in hearing the truth or my side of the story, so I stood there for a moment, watching the scene play out, and then I turned and left because there was no point in remaining in that miserable place for another second. By the time I returned to my empty apartment, I hardly had the strength to remove my coat before, for the first time in a long time, I collapsed onto the couch and sobbed until my chest hurt. I sobbed for all the years I had wasted, the humiliation I had experienced, and the blatant injustice of it all. Henry was a self-centered, heartless jerk who had trampled on our decades of marriage and thrown me aside, and now he didn't even have the grace to acknowledge what I had gone through. He didn't care that the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. In 50 years of marriage, Henry and I had never had a wedding. In our early years, when money was tight, we hardly ever took any vacations. I was being made fun of by strangers who were tearing me apart with their words. Why did he get to act like the victim? Why did I, his wife of 50 years, have to endure the humiliation of being called a homewrecker? The only unquestionable evidence of our relationship at this point was the son we shared, Jose Tez, an ungrateful, self-centered excuse for a son, but even he had long since turned his back on me. I knew he had heard about what had happened at the cafe because my phone had been ringing constantly with messages from him. Later, when we moved houses, I had left behind the few pictures we did have. Jose had only one thing to say. He called me a cruel, spiteful, and heartless old woman. He accused me of making a scene by pushing Paula too hard, causing her to faint. Why did you have to go and do this, Mom? What was the point of making things worse? Paula was being kind to you, and you just had to cause drama. What's wrong with you? I had to face the fact that I had been waiting for too long, that I had made too many mistakes in my life, that I had married the wrong man, that I had given birth to the wrong son, and that I had wasted 50 years on things that I didn't care about, like the fact that you almost put her back in the hospital. That was my son, the child I had almost died giving birth to, the boy I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for, and now he was calling me a monster. Scandals spread faster than wildfire in this digital age, and the incident at the cafe involving my confrontation with Paula, her dramatic fainting, and Henry's hasty hospitalization was captured on camera by curious onlookers. Within hours, the video went viral, but naturally, it omitted my accusations against Paula. The clip that circulated online only featured Henry scolding me. The person who posted it didn't even attempt to be impartial. Instead, they framed it as Henry valiantly protecting his true love from a jealous, vengeful ex-wife who was attempting to take him away. Imagine 50 years of marriage being betrayed and abandoned, and now I'm being portrayed as the mistress. The comments were brutal, with hundreds of thousands of strangers attacking me, calling me vile, pitiful, shameless, and an elderly woman attempting to ruin a lovely love story. She had her chance, and Henry obviously moved on, so why is she still holding on to Paula? She is so kind and elegant, and yet this resentful ex-wife is still harassing her. It is a disgrace that I once tried. I once posted a statement to express my peace and tell the truth, but my words were instantly drowned out by waves of new insults and comments, burying my voice before it could even be heard. Maybe if things had gone this way, the internet would have moved on in a few days, and people would have forgotten me and found a new scandal to brag about, but then Jose, my son, given my life to raising him, he put the last nail in the coffin at the height of the controversy, when my name was still trending, in the worst way possible. He uploaded a picture of Paula and Henry holding hands and looking at each other with intense love, with Jose and his wife standing behind them, grinning, making it a picture-perfect moment. Happy family. The caption underneath it said, as long as my family is together, that's all that matters. And if my child was publicly choosing her over me online, that was all the evidence they needed. If my child were backing Paula, then I was the issue, and I watched helplessly as the hatred toward me grew. Her son doesn't want her around, which says it all. I asked my friends to speak up for me to post the truth, but their words were ignored and drowned out, just like my marriage and my place in my own family. I stopped trying for days, hardly leaving my apartment, because she had been a nightmare as a wife and mother if her family abandoned her in this way. It's embarrassing to think of being so resentful that your child turns against you. I isolated myself from the outside world, learned to cope with loneliness, and spent my time in solitude attempting to put the pieces of myself back together after they had been shattered. However, something unexpected happened one afternoon. When the women I had met on my trip and the friends I had made showed up at my door without warning. When they saw how I was feeling, they all reacted with the same fierceness. I can't believe what they've done to you, my dear friend. We've only been apart for a week, and despite what the internet claims, we know the truth. That woman is a liar. And Henry is an elderly fool who acts like he's still in his 20s. He's pathetic, and let's not even talk about your son. Posting that image to make you feel completely unforgivable and hearing them stand up for me without hesitation made me lose it. I cried for the first time in weeks, not because I was depressed but because I was overwhelmed by the fact that these women, whom I had only known for a month, had more faith in me than the people I had loved my entire life. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and sat up straighter. Screw Henry. When the tears stopped and my breathing calmed, I finally opened up and told them everything. I told them about every injustice, betrayal, and moment I had spent going above and beyond for people who never once showed appreciation for me. By the time I was finished, something inside of me had changed, like a long-held burden had finally been lifted. My friends exchanged relieved GL looks, saying, "We were worried you wouldn't be able to let go," one of them admitted, "but seeing you like this, we should have known better about those losers." Who cares? Let him have Paula. I wouldn't take him back if he begged. Jose, that ungrateful bastard, wants Paula as his mother. Fine, he can have her. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. We sat together, laughing and making plans for the future, not just for the retirement home, but also for our next trip. As the gray clouds that had been hanging over us for days finally started to part and sunlight came streaming through my apartment window, warm and golden. Since there was still so much of the world to see and I was going to live this time for myself, day by day, my life slowly returned to peace while Henry's world fell into chaos. As soon as our divorce was finalized, Paula moved into Henry Torres's house, and at first, everything appeared picture perfect. Jose was so enamored with Paula's polished manner that he neglected to treat her as a second mother. She was certain that she was more graceful, elegant, and deserving than Henry and me. Henry and I were still engrossed in their renewed romance. But illusions were short-lived, and soon reality came crashing down without me in the house. No one was there to cook, clean, or maintain order, and Jose was unwilling to pay for a housekeeper or a trust. Paula made a brief attempt to cook, clean, and even take care of Jose's child after an outsider in their home implied that she should take over. After all, wasn't it only natural for the lady of the house to handle household duties to gain their approval? Paula was no housewife. She had spent her entire life being Henry and Josel lost several pounds, and one near-fatal case of food poisoning. Sent them to the hospital. She neglected to take care of others, showed no interest in learning, and had no patience for household chores. The results were disastrous. She left clothes damp in the washing machine for hours or even days until they got moldy. The last straw was when she made Jacob's formula with boiling water without cooling it down, causing the baby to scream in agony and the whole family to spend the night at the emergency room. She had to be washed again because she was more interested in watching TV than paying attention to little Jacob. He fell, bumped his head, and even cried to himself several times while she sat obliviously on the couch. Then, with rage burning in his eyes, Jose yelled at her, "You don't work, you don't contribute financially, and yet you can't even take care of a child." Paula was already tired of the never-ending chores, and her complaints erupted immediately. Oh, maybe you should think about your failures instead," he said. "You're a grown man too cheap to hire a damn housekeeper, and let me want to remind you that I am your father's wife, not some ma for the taste family, and I owe you nothing at all." Jose is now furious and pointing a trembling finger at her wife. "What a mistress you are, a washed-up mistress who sneaked into this house, and you and my dad aren't even legally married. So, in my opinion, you're not family." Paula's face was twisted with rage. "But now that you care about your family, where was this energy when you and your father made her leave?" She now regrets it and is considering pleading with him to return. She grabbed Henry's arm in desperation for support, but Henry, who was exhausted and defeated, said nothing and just stood there. For the first time, his face was dark with fatigue, and he refused to take sides. It appeared that even he had grown tired of the never-ending fights, as the shouting match in their ears got so loud that a doctor had to intervene to tell them to stop. They didn't listen, and it wasn't until hospital security was called that they were finally compelled to leave. Sadly for them, a bystander had captured everything on camera within hours. When a video was posted online, it went viral, and this time, people realized that it was the same Paula from the last viral scandal. The poor, defenseless woman Henry had shielded from his evil ex-wife turned out to be nothing more than a manipulative homewrecker. The outrage was immediate, and people dug up my old statement, which everyone had ignored, so now my story had a reader. To be clear, this woman ended a 50-year marriage and then played the victim. Henry and his son threw away a real wife and mother for this, and Jose Torres is the worst. He publicly humiliated his mother to praise a mistress who was completely disgusting. Rebecca, if you ever see this, we think you deserve better than these awful people. The backlash was swift and vicious. Enemies overnight. Jose's sales job depended on his reputation, and with his name now toxic, his boss conveniently found a reason to fire him. He was left jobless and frustrated, and he spent his days at home arguing with Paula non-stop, threatening to fire her. Henry, caught in the middle, was powerless to stop the argument. On one side was the woman he had been waiting for, the love of his life, but on the other side was his only son, whose life had been ruined by Paula. He lost every decision he made. So instead he gave up and spent his days sitting by the window, sighing endlessly, staring blankly into the distance. Meanwhile, Jose's wife, Sophia, became the only adult in the home, working full-time before coming home to cook, clean, and take full care of their son. When she finally had enough, she called me and said, "Mom, when are you coming back? We need you. The house is falling apart without you." Her message came as I was mid-spin, dancing in the arms of a charming man I had met at the ballroom. I looked at my phone, then smirked and turned it over, ignoring it because I was finally living for myself, and I wasn't going back. Fernando. He was a man about my age, and although he never remarried, he found comfort in dancing at the ballroom. He was a typical warm, elegant, and effortlessly charming man, and people were drawn to his kindness. Tonight, he was gently correcting my posture and guiding me through a step, using the same gentle encouragement I had once given Henry, which helped him gradually move toward his own goals. Success, but the peace didn't last. Sophia had mentioned that Jose was getting impatient because I wasn't responding to his messages, and as I had anticipated, he found me the moment he saw me dancing and having fun with Fernando. His face was twisted with rage, and he shoved Fernando away and moved himself between us. "The house is in total disarray, and you're dancing here? Stuck to me like glue, Mom. You're not young anymore. It's not safe for you to live alone, let alone go to some retirement home. Nothing is more comfortable than your own home. I ignored him, brushing past him to check on Fernando. I'm so sorry about that. Fernando just smiled and waved it off like it was nothing. If you need me, I'll be right here, Jose, realizing that I wasn't even acknowledged in his tantrum. I'm taking you home right now, and there's a big dinner waiting for you. Dad misses you, and he constantly talks about you, pleading with me to bring you back. Whatever the misunderstanding was, you two should just talk it out. Couples fights are normal, Jose. He talked endlessly, grating on my nerves, and before he could argue, my sisters arrived, and my amazing group of friends, the ones who had supported me through everything, and when they first saw me, their smiles turned to cold, sarcastic sarcasm. Well, what kind of wind blew this guy over? This is the same Jose who disregarded his mother's pleas earlier. What a miracle. I knew they were exacting revenge on me, but I didn't stop them. In fact, I smirked and added, a dead man suddenly coming. Jose's face darkened at my words. But my friends weren't finished. Remember, you were the one who threw your mom out and invited the home wrecker into your home. Now you're crawling back hilariously, and your mom is doing well, having us, making new friends, and, let's face it, having a lot more fun now than she ever did. It's funny that after decades of suffering in that house, I finally realized that. The moment I left, I had my freedom, my peace, and my happiness. Your aunt paid and made fun, and she's ecstatic. Meanwhile, your house is falling apart, and it sounds like someone is jealous that their mother is happier without them. I laughed with them. They were miserable, Henry. Paula. Jose opened his mouth, hesitated, and then forced himself to swallow his pride. His voice became pathetic. Mom, I know I was wrong. Can you forgive me just this once? Paula is gone. I kicked her out. You don't have to worry anymore. You can come home now. Jose's face fell apart, and then my friend sighed, unimpressed, and I finished watching the performance when he fell to his knees in front of everyone, crying like a child. One of them grabbed my arm and began dragging me away, saying, Come on, let's not waste time on him, let's go dance. I let them lead me away without hesitation because the truth was that Henry and Jose had decided to protect Paula over me from the very beginning. I had a life to live, and they stopped mattering. Just as we were ready to leave, Jose's phone rang, and it was Sophia. I'm not sure what she said, but it startled him so much that his phone fell out of his hands and landed on the floor. For a long time, he just stood there, frozen, his face colorless, and a terrible thought came to me. Is it Jacob? My grandson was innocent throughout this whole situation, and regardless of what transpired between me and his father, I would never want anything to happen to him. Jose, please tell me what happened. I was in a panic, prepared to shake him if necessary, but he simply stood there stunned and unresponsive for several minutes before he finally got over it, and when he did, tears came streaming down his face, and his whole body shook as he uttered a heartbreaking sob. Mom, please. Come with me to the hospital. His voice cracked. Dad had a stroke, and he's in critical condition. The doctor says he might not make it despite everything. Sensing my hesitation, my friend intervened with a gentle yet firm voice. If you want to go, then go, we know you've moved on, but even if Henry had hurt me, even if I no longer loved him, I couldn't deny what we once shared. I stood there, caught between the past and the present, wondering if I should go or even care. I was doing this for myself, not Henry, so I followed Jose to the hospital to say goodbye without saying another word. It had been months since I last saw Henry, and here he was hooked up. That doesn't mean you can erase 50 years overnight, that's right. Whether you care for him or not, seeing him one last time won't change the life you've built now, but if you don't go, you might regret it later. Through the hospital room's glass window, I stood motionless as Sophia gazed at me with beseeching eyes and clutched my hand as she whispered, Mom, but I didn't answer, didn't go inside, and just continued to stare at the man in that bed. To say that I felt nothing would be a lie after 50 years of marriage, regardless of how much pain it had caused. Jose, on the other hand, was distraught, and he knelt on the floor, sobbing and clutching his hair as he repeated how this happened. Dad was fine this morning. How did it happen? It wasn't love anymore, but there was something else, something closer to family, pressing down on my chest. This occurred at that moment, and Sophia's face darkened as her frustration boiled over. Isn't it clear that this woman is the reason Henry ended up feeling this way? Tell me everything, Sophia scoffed, her voice laced with contempt. You have no idea how terrible that woman truly is. She let out a sharp exhale before continuing to explain. She vanished for a few days after we threw her out, and we assumed she was gone forever, but then she returned with an elderly man we had never seen before, and she paraded him before Henry. Angry, Henry told her to leave and never return, but today she reappeared, her hair in a mess and her appearance completely out of control. I was home at the time, but I assumed it was their business, so I stayed upstairs and didn't interfere. Sophia swallowed hard, her voice breaking. She wanted to make amends and return, but Henry refused, so she threatened to leave if he didn't take her back. Her hands were shaking, and I finally went downstairs to reprimand her, but before I could get there, I heard their argument get out of hand, and then there was a loud thud. By the time I arrived, she had left, and Henry had her. "I'll find that myself. I'll make her pay." Sophia blocked. My breath caught. Henry, who was on the floor, unconscious, blood pooling around his head, had hit the corner of the table when he collapsed. I panicked and called an ambulance right away, but it was too late. The doctor said it was a stroke, and Jose, shaking with rage, rushed to his feet and stormed toward the exit. Henry's lifeless body, still motionless in his hospital bed, caught my attention. I sighed a long, exhausted sigh, unsure of what I was feeling, pity, resentment, or closure, but then I realized it was Rebecca. The patient kept calling for her, so a doctor hurried out and scanned the room. I raised my hands. I had already called the police. When I entered, Henry struggled to raise his hand as if reaching for me, but his body was too weak, and he could only stare at Rebecca. I thought we would be done forever, but he insisted that I come quickly. He just regained consciousness, but his condition is critical, and he won't stop asking for you one last time. He sounded like a whisper, and I assumed that you wouldn't want to see me again. I didn't respond. Instead, I just went to the side table to pour him a glass of warm water. But he shook his head feebly, saying, "You don't have to do anything for me anymore, SMI. I was the one who failed you. I finally realized how wonderful you were to me, Rebecca, but I was blind and selfish, and I didn't appreciate you until it was too late." He sobbed, and I put down the cup because I didn't need to serve him any longer. "Henry," I said steadily, "I know you want my forgiveness, but I'm not going to give it to you on my own." His eyes glowed with regret, his lips quivered, and he fell silent. His face gradually broke under the weight of his guilt, but I persisted, "I don't hate you either. I just want us to live apart from one another and never again meddle in each other's affairs. Paula destroyed you, and I live for myself now, so I eat what I want, go where I want, and surround myself with people who genuinely care about me. I don't have to walk on eggshells anymore, and for the first time in my life, I'm happy." I wasn't lying, and the smile on my face wasn't forced. Henry noticed it too, and his fingers twitched, but he said Henry gave me a broken cough, but we didn't argue because we both knew I had already moved on. I turned to leave Rebecca, but I stopped, not looking back. "If there is a next life, would you marry me again?" I hardly hesitated before responding, "No, in my next life I will marry someone who loves me, not someone whose heart belongs to another." I felt lighter than I had in years after leaving the hospital. Bound by the burden of my past, a marriage that had taken more from me than it had ever given, a son who had put convenience before love, and a life that had never felt like mine, but now that I was free, I fully embraced that freedom. The following day, I packed my bags. My friends and I had been discussing going on another trip for weeks, and I knew that now was the best time to do it. I was as excited as a girl embarking on her first grand adventure when I thought about the month-long cruise we had booked through Europe, Italy, Greece, Spain, and France. We boarded the ship in Barcelona, the salty ocean breeze caressing our skin as we stood on deck and watched the coastline disappear into the new beginning. One of my friends raised her glass of wine at dinner that evening to toast the new beginning. We spent our days enjoying the beauty of new places in Rome, exploring the ancient ruins of the Colosseum, and tracing the steps of long-gone civilizations in Santorini. In Santorini, we watched the sun melt into the Aegean Sea, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson while sipping crisp white wine from a small family-run business. Freedom was another time in, and I added, laughing, that we should never let a man waste another second of our lives. We enjoyed the most delicious pastries at a small cafe in Paris that was hidden away from the busy tourist crowds. We laughed over stories about our youth, past loves, and unfulfilled dreams, as well as the amazing lives we were still creating for ourselves. Throughout the entire time, I took pictures of everything, not for approval from others but for myself. Was my life now, a life in which I awoke every morning with joy rather than fear, a life in which I didn't need permission to be joyful, and in the quiet moments, when I sat by the water's edge or stood under the Eiffel Tower's glow, I realized that I wasn't just happy but at peace. Months went by, and my friendships deepened. We were no longer just traveling companions but family. After that night at the dance hall, Fernando and I stayed in touch. He invited me to dinner not as friends, but as something more, and for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to feel loved again. He was kind and patient, and unlike Henry, he never made me feel like I had to prove myself. We danced and chatted for hours. One evening, as we stood on my apartment balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance, he turned to me and Asked, "Are you happy?" I didn't hesitate more than I ever imagined possible, and that was the truth I had. Slowly, effortlessly, love returned into my life, not the kind that required sacrifice, but the kind that celebrated freedom, individuality, and mutual respect. Lost a lot, but I ultimately acquired something much more valuable.